It all started on an ordinary summer evening. On one of those nights when the world was sleeping outside, everything seemed calm. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, unable to fall asleep because of the heat. Just then, I heard light footsteps coming down the hallway. At first, I thought it was my mom or maybe our cat, but the sound stopped just outside my door. Then, a hesitant knock made me shudder. That was my stepfather. Let me paint you a picture of him. He wasn't an authoritarian or intimidating man. On the contrary, he was always friendly, smiling, and approachable. But sometimes I noticed that he would look at me a little too long, and there was something in that look, but I couldn't understand what it was. That night, I heard his voice through the door. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. It gives me support. Hey, are you awake? He said softly, almost apologetically. I hesitated, but finally answered. Yes, what happened? He opened the door slowly, just enough to poke his head in. It was hard to read his expression, but there was a strange tension in his eyes. I can't sleep, he said. I sat up in bed, and then he entered the room and closed the door behind him. This action made me very uneasy. Why had he closed the door? What could be so important? He didn't sit down. He stood in the room for a while and looked around. There was a strange atmosphere. He was trying to say something, but he didn't know how to start. Finally, he said, "This may seem strange, but I wanted to check up on you." I had never seen him want to check up on me like that before. This behavior was not normal. "I'm fine," I said and tried to look relaxed, but there was something in his expression, something in his eyes that bothered me. He took a step closer. "How are you? Are you really okay?" he asked again. He came even closer to my bed. This made me feel very uncomfortable. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. It gives me support. Yes, I'm fine, I said again, trying to keep my distance. Finally, he said, okay, and stepped back. But before he walked out the door, he paused for a moment as if he was going to say something else. Then he turned around and walked out. He left me there, confused and uneasy. I replayed that night over and over in my mind, trying to figure out what was going on. Was I overthinking, or was something really going on? In the following days, I noticed a subtle change in his behavior, his posture, the way he spoke. Even the distance he stood from me was different when he watched me. These changes were not obvious, but intense enough to make me uncomfortable. One night, I was in the kitchen preparing a late snack when I found him standing by the counter with his back to me, playing with something in his hand. At first, I didn't pay attention to him. I went on with my work, but then he spoke. Hey, he said, his voice low and calm. Can I ask you something? There was a familiar timbre to his voice as he called out to make sure everything was okay, but something was missing. His usual friendly, playful way of asking about my day somehow seemed like an echo of a distant past. I didn't know why, but my senses were alarmed. It was as if there was something more than an ordinary conversation. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. It gives me support. Are you okay? He asked. I tried to answer, but it was impossible to hide the tension in my voice. He took a step closer, so close that he pushed the boundaries uncomfortably. No need. I know something's wrong, he said. My back hit the counter. I tried to run, but the air in the room was thicker, the space narrower. We're fine, I repeated, more as if trying to convince myself. But the look in his eyes told me that answer was inadequate. It was as if he was trying to understand me, but his expression held the wrong meaning. Discomfort spread to every corner of the room. He took a step closer, his voice a whisper. Are you sure? Because I think you and we can talk. Just the two of us. Those words sent a cold shiver down my spine. It was as if nothing was true. I was about to say something when my mom's voice came from the other room. Maybe later, was all I could say as I quickly left the room, but her eyes told me that this conversation was not over yet. Nothing was the same that night. His gaze hovered over me, watching me without realizing it. Every time our eyes met, I immediately looked away. But please subscribe to my channel to support me. It gives me support. This strangeness was only on the surface. There was something deeper, something darker that I felt. The following weekend, my mother would be working late and I would be home alone with her. Normally, this would mean nothing. But now, every little movement seemed to be charged. I was in the living room watching TV. He came into the room and sat on the couch next to me. He wasn't very close, but in that moment, it was like he was testing the waters. "How's school going?" he asked, sounding relieved, but something was different. I answered, but the silence between us grew more tense. Then he turned slightly towards me and said, "Actually, I've been thinking a lot about talking to you lately," he said, his voice slowly lowering. My stomach tightened, my breath caught in my throat. This was not the kind of thing a stepfather would say. The weight of his words hung in the air. I froze. "You're growing up so fast," he said. "Yesterday you were a child, and now you're a beautiful young woman. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. It gives me support." Panic took over my body. He had crossed the line. These words were not a compliment. They were invasive. He no longer spoke to me like a stepfather. He saw me as someone else. I stood up quickly, said, "I need some time alone in my room," and walked away. I slammed the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. Adrenaline was pumping through my veins. He was testing me, pushing me to the limits. It was more than just awkwardness now. This was something dark and dangerous lurking deep inside. And I didn't know how to stop it. Over the next few days, everything became a blur. Each time we met, the fear grew inside me. I thought about telling my mom, but would she listen? Would she believe me? What if it was just me who misunderstood? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't just sit back and wait. Late one night, it was one of the few disturbing nights I couldn't sleep. I found myself standing in the kitchen, trying to collect my thoughts. My mom wasn't home. I'll just make a snack and clear my mind, I thought. However, as I grabbed something from the fridge, I heard a familiar sound. Approaching footsteps. I didn't need to turn around. I knew it was him. "Hey," he said in a calm voice, but the calmness disturbed me. My heart was racing. My palms were sweaty. I didn't want to talk to him. I wasn't ready after everything that had happened, but I couldn't just walk away without saying anything. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked, my voice shaky and forced. He looked at me, leaning against the counter, his arms folded across his chest. His eyes were filled with an expression so intense that it hit me like a punch in the gut. "Please subscribe to my channel to support me. It gives me support." "You're trying to ignore me," he said. His voice was low but determined. "We need to fix this." It was as if something was broken and he was implying that we could fix it. But it was my trust that was broken. He had crossed the line, not me. "I'm not avoiding you," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "It just doesn't feel right to talk right now." But he didn't believe it. He stepped away from the counter and took a step closer to me. "You've been avoiding me since that night. I don't think it's a coincidence," he said. His words sent a shiver down my spine. I realized he was referring to that night. I was trying to forget that moment, but he was bringing it all back to the surface. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, but my voice was low and uncertain. "I know better than you think," he said, his voice lowering like a shadow, taking on a dangerous tone. When his eyes took another step closer, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I was stuck where I was. Just as everything was about to become unbearable, the door opened and my mother came in. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Her voice cut through the tension in the room like a knife. My stepfather immediately backed away as if nothing had happened. "Everything's fine," I said quickly with a fake smile. My mother seemed suspicious, but she didn't continue. That night I locked my door, afraid that things would get worse. But in the middle of the night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to a knocking on my door. I stood motionless on the bed, afraid to breathe. The knocking came again, louder this time. It was as if he was trying to wake me up. My heart felt like it was going to stop. Should I keep silent or should I answer? The knocking at the door stopped. I was waiting in the bed, wrapped tightly in the blanket. At that moment, I felt my heart beating like it was going to burst through my chest. Finally, I didn't hear a sound for a while. Is he gone? I thought, but I didn't want to believe it. I put my ear to the door, and the silence in the room seemed to deepen. As my mind raced through thousands of possibilities in a few seconds, I suddenly heard his footsteps. This time, he was walking away. I was a little relieved when I realized he was retreating, but that night was sleepless. Fear and anxiety suffocated my thoughts. This can't go on like this, I thought. I had to find a solution. The next morning, when I went down to the breakfast table, my stepfather was sitting at the table. His relaxed demeanor bore no trace of the tension of the night before. When his eyes shifted to me, he sent me a smile. That smile sent a wave of chills through me. My mother was at the counter making coffee. "Did you sleep well last night?" she asked. There was a casualness in her voice that made me think she didn't know anything. "I was fine," I said, but I almost didn't believe myself as my voice came out. Throughout breakfast, everything seemed normal, but the way he looked at me made it all the worse. It was like a game, a challenge. It was like he was waiting for me to say something, to make a mistake. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. It gives me support. That day, I made up my mind. I couldn't go on like this any longer. But was it possible to go to my mother and tell her everything as it was? What if she didn't believe me? What if things got worse when I told her? I picked up my phone and decided to text a friend of mine. I didn't dare to write to him openly, but I wrote, "I need to tell you something. When can we meet?" There was no reply for a while. While I was waiting, I was sitting alone in my room. I had locked the door again. As I thought about what had happened and what might happen, a knot formed in my stomach. I didn't want to be silent anymore, but I didn't know how to break the silence. I lunged for my phone when I heard a text message. My friend's reply was short. "Are you free this afternoon? I'll listen to what you want to tell me." This message gave me hope. Knowing that I was no longer alone, that at least someone would listen to me, gave me some relief. But at that moment, I heard footsteps outside the room. I quickly hung up the phone and turned to face the door. A shadow appeared under the door. Then that familiar voice was heard. "We need to talk." I knew I couldn't escape this time.